She was a woman who had never tasted the sweetness of an easy life. Hunger, cold nights, and the endless weight of poverty were the only companions she had ever known. Every dream she once held had been stolen by the cruel hands of fate, leaving her with nothing but survival. Yet even in her broken world, a miracle happened. She met him. He was everything she was not. Where her life was dust and silence, his was filled with gold and applause. Where she walked in worn shoes, he drove through cities in shining cars. He was a man wrapped in power, charm, and wealth, someone who seemed untouchable, someone who belonged to a universe far above her own. And yet, when his eyes met hers, the world changed. At first, she tried to resist. She told herself love was not for her, not when she had nothing to give. She laughed at the thought of standing beside him, of being seen as his equal. How could a woman who barely had bread to eat dream of a man who dined under chandeliers? But the heart has no logic. His presence burned through her doubts, and every time he smiled, her defenses crumbled. He saw in her something the world refused to acknowledge. Where others saw a destitute woman, he saw purity, strength, and a beauty untouched by greed. He admired her courage to survive in a world that tried every day to break her. He loved her scars as much as her smile. And when he told her he loved her, it was not a whisper. It was a promise. He swore to give her the life she deserved, to protect her, to lift her into a world she had never imagined. For the first time in her life, she felt rich, not because of diamonds or dresses, but because his love wrapped around her like the warmest blanket on the coldest night. With him, she was not a beggar, not an outcast, not a forgotten soul. She was his, and in that belonging, she discovered a wealth greater than any coin could buy. Their love was reckless, breathtaking, and unstoppable. Every stolen glance, every touch, every word they shared lit a fire in her heart that made her forget the world's cruelty. He held her hand in crowded rooms, daring anyone to question their bond. He kissed away her tears when humiliation cut her down, and his embrace told her again and again, "You are enough. You are mine. You are everything." For her, love was no longer a fantasy whispered in the dark. It became her reality, her strength, her reason to breathe. And in his arms, the poor woman who once had nothing discovered the one treasure that could never be measured, his love. The world is never kind to those who dare to love beyond its boundaries. When their love blossomed, it did not take long for whispers to grow into storms. His family, wealthy and powerful, could not bear the thought of him lowering himself to a woman born in poverty. To them, she was a stain, a shadow, an embarrassment that threatened their name and reputation. Their fortune had been built for generations, and they could not allow it to be touched by someone who had nothing to her. Name but scars and survival. They tried to silence the bond at first with polite warnings. His mother's cold words, his father's thundering voice, his relatives' mocking laughter, they all echoed through his home. They told him it was just infatuation, a passing distraction. They reminded him of his duty, his status, his place in society. But love had already taken root in his heart, and he refused to let go. So the whispers grew sharper. Soon they turned to threats, schemes, and poison wrapped in elegant words. The woman became the target of cruel gossip. People called her names, painted her as a manipulator, a gold digger who used her beauty to climb into a world where she did not belong. Wherever she went, eyes followed, lips curled in disdain, and laughter stabbed her like knives. She carried the humiliation silently, but each cut left a mark. What hurt her most was not the scorn of strangers, but the way it tried to tear down the love she held sacred. He fought for her with every breath, but the weight of society pressed harder each day. The business world whispered doubts into his father's ear. Family allies threatened to break ties. His inheritance, his empire, his future, all of it was dangled before him like a chain. And still he held her hand, though his grip trembled under the pressure. But society has a way of bending even the strongest hearts. The pressure was relentless, and slowly the cracks began to show. She saw it in his tired eyes, in the way his smile faltered, in the silence that grew between them. He loved her, yes, but love alone was not enough to fight a world determined to crush them. For her, every insult became a battle. For him, every confrontation became a war. They were two souls trying to fight against 1,000 voices. And though their love was fierce, the walls closing in were fiercer. The chains of family honor and societal pride grew tighter, pulling him away from her inch by inch. She begged him not to give in, but in his heart, he was torn between two worlds, one where love lived and one where duty demanded sacrifice. And as the days turned darker, she realized that love might not be enough to save them from the cruelty of the world that refused to let them be. The night she found out he was going to marry another, her heart shattered in silence. She had fought with every ounce of strength, held on to hope even when the world mocked her. But this truth was the final blow. He had promised her forever. He had sworn his love would protect her, yet now he was being forced into a future where she had no place. She sat alone in the darkness, clutching the letter he had written weeks before, the one where he told her she was his everything, the one where he begged her never to doubt his heart. But what good were promises when reality had already taken him away? Tears streamed down her face as she walked to the riverside, the same place where their love had first been born. The wind was cold, the water restless, as if the world itself was mourning with her. She thought about every smile they had shared, every embrace, every kiss that had made her forget she was poor, forget she was unwanted by society. In his arms, she had felt like a queen. Without him, she was nothing but a broken woman with no reason left to live. She took out a piece of paper and began to write. Each word bled with love and despair. She told him he was her miracle, the only treasure she had ever known, and that she would love him beyond this life. She wrote that her death was not an act of hate, but the final proof of how deeply she belonged to him. If she could not walk beside him in this world, then she would wait for him in another. When her hand finally trembled to a stop, she folded the letter with care, kissed it, and left it on the riverbank like a fragment of her soul. With one last look at the night sky, she let the water embrace her. The river swallowed her silently, carrying her away into the darkness, as though nature itself wanted to hide the tragedy of her fate. When he discovered her lifeless body, it was as if his own heart had been torn from his chest. He fell to his knees, clutching her cold hand, screaming her name into the heavens until his voice broke. The man who once had everything, wealth, status, power, suddenly realized he had nothing. He would inherit empires, but none of it mattered, for the woman who gave meaning to his life was gone. Her death became his eternal punishment. Every corner of his mansion reminded him of her absence. Every luxury felt like a mockery of what he had lost. He lived surrounded by riches but destitute in soul, haunted by her memory, haunted by the letter she left behind. He smiled for the world, but inside, he carried a graveyard where her love lay buried. The story of the destitute woman's fatal love became a whisper in every shadow, a tale retold to remind others that true love is priceless. But the world often demands a price too cruel to pay. Please click subscribe to our channel. We have more stories coming soon. Miss any new stories? Thank you for listening.